They say that many of the teachings of how we live come from the grizzly bear. The bear dance is a medicine healing dance, a ceremonial dance, but also a celebration dance. There is no other dance like it. The actions and movements mimic the movements and gestures that a grizzly bear would do. And so scooping up my hand, harvesting the salmon. When I'm shrugging the shoulders, that's like Grizz is walking on the earth. Sometimes they're very playful and they're trying to catch a butterfly or a bee, so they will be jumping up. When I'm wearing the hide, I am one with Grizz. I am the bear.
Over here. So here he is. So what's his name? Grizz. Yeah. You can come and pet him.
Grizz is the grizzly bear that I dance with. He's from my community of Houston. The grizzly bear habitat has been encroached upon. Grizz was put down for the safety of humans.
Guess how he sharpens his claws? Scratching on the trees.
And so with that, my community retrieved him, and from there, I've been with Grizz. So I've danced with Grizz and ceremonied with Grizz, had a sweat lodge with Grizz, bask in the sun with Grizz, do yoga with Grizz, and that's a part of acknowledging Grizz's spirit.
We don't hunt bears and we don't kill bears. If we look after the grizzly bear, then we are also looking after the sustainability of our culture.
I used to powwow dance and do the whole powwow circuit thing. I took a step back from that because I began to realize powwows were never a part of Bear Clan culture. And so I wanted my children to see that you don't have to do those dances, you can do your own dances. So all my history and all my strength and all my songs and all my ancestors, those are the memories that keep me going and keep me moving.
Woo, bear hug. Good job.
This is where we wanted to not. Thank you. I appreciate that. You're probably wondering about that next dance. Got nothing to do with this. Okay. That's YouTube for you. I want you to imagine for a moment when we have this person, let's call her Laura, and we have a grizzly bear. And can you imagine that if they had met before the grizzly bear had stopped existing physically, could they have come together and danced? Probably not. That wouldn't have been a good idea. And the reason it wouldn't have been a good idea is because if we really dissect it and we drill into it, is that both of them would have been attached to who and what they are, human, bear, and there would have been fear around that. I think that if any of us were in the wild, and I've been fortunate enough to be in the wild around a few black bears, you know, and when I encounter them, it's like, you know, it's great to see them, but, you know, I'm not going to get in there, you know, I'm not going to get close. I'm certainly not going to, hey, you want to dance, you know, especially if there's a cub involved or something like that, let alone a grizzly bear, you know. I mean, these absolutely magnificent beings in this world that do what they do very well, and they have their own existence. I love the fact that she shows a playful side to them, because I think sometimes they're portrayed as being so vicious, and that's part of her dance. And she says, when I put on the hide, I joined the spirit of Grizz. And so now, after he, she, I don't know, lost, the heart stopped, the organs stopped, and she says, because for the safety of humans. And then she said, it was after that that we got together, and we see her regalia. We see her ceremonial garb that takes her. So Grizz has become this head, this skin, but is also spirit. And I'm asking you today, I mean, when you listen to me, I talked earlier about metaphysics and spirituality. And spirituality, I think, I believe that everyone here today is a spiritual seeker, or you wouldn't be here. And so some part of spirituality is what we call mysticism. And mysticism simply means the mystery, what we cannot prove in a microscope or on a whiteboard. We haven't got the math yet to understand mysticism. And as a metaphysician myself, I would say that in our teaching, the founder of our movement, a gentleman by the name of Ernest Holmes, talked about the reality behind the reality. So it's like the reality with a capital R behind the reality with a small r. And basically that this physical expression that we have is actually, when we look at the universal energies, the universal powers, the universal existence, it is much larger than our existence. However, our existence is important because we are an expression of that. And that's what Laura and Grizz come together to do. They come together so that she can become an environmental activist, so she can become a spiritual activist, so she can become a cultural activist. And they dance together. And in the meantime, she is able to allow young people, anybody, but I mean, I love what she's doing with children, to come in contact with Grizz, because now Grizz is safe to come in contact with, so that those children can now connect with that spirit as well. So as I mentioned before I played the video, I said, this has helped me with my own realization of my own spiritual journey. And so we asked the question, well, why, what are you talking about? So one of our spiritual ancestors in New Thought movement, in metaphysics, Centers for Spiritual Living, in our side of the spiritual tracks, is a gentleman by the name of Charles Fillmore. And Charles Fillmore is one of our ancestors because he is no longer physically here, but today I'd like to dance with him in my own way. And so Charles and I are going to get together. And Charles says, in the wonderful writings that he left us, he said, within the ether of infinite oneness. Okay, ether, that's an old school word. And that's a word that was used by old metaphysicians that basically says, in the midst of all the atoms, in the midst of all this atomic energy that is life, in all of its forms, all of its tables, all of its mathematics. And what physics says, if you go down deep enough and you go way down there, you will see emptiness in between. And as metaphysicians, we believe that that emptiness is not truly empty. There is an intelligence there, a spiritual intelligence. And that is my definition of spirit. Okay, that's the definition I work with. In that emptiness is the power. It is behind everything. And so Fillmore uses this really old-fashioned word that you don't hear much anymore. Within the ether of infinite oneness, we hold forth our desires, that's prayer, for action, with the door closed to all materially limited appearance and thinking. Think about that for a moment. Laura and the grizzly bear, that would have been limited material thinking. If they had met in a field somewhere to dance, they wouldn't have been able to do that because of the limitations of where they were physically. Fillmore says when we shut the door to that, then we open up to a whole nother experience. With the door closed to all materially limited appearance and thinking, where there is a clarity of highest expression, where we work through aligning with the Most High. Then he goes on, occupying a space where the clarity through mysticism combine, formulating infinite possibility and potential. For any of you who have ever been involved in transformation in your life, you are going from some place to another place. Mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically, whatever. Whatever the challenge is, whatever the darkness is, whatever the shadow is, whatever is causing you discomfort or angst or keeping you awake at night, whatever that place is in your life. In order to deal with the idea of transforming that and moving beyond it to a place that we would call wellness, wholeness, or comfort, we have to leave a consciousness behind to embrace a new consciousness. That's what Fillmore is saying. Shut the door. The first time I ever saw this video, and I've been following her for a long time in different ways. She has a lot online. The first time I saw this, which wasn't very long ago, I just sat there in front of my computer and I'm going, prayer. There it is. That's what she's doing. That's what this dance is. And everything that comes forth from that. Now, let's imagine for a moment. Now, let's go back to the physical Laura and the physical grizzly bear. Now, in terms of consciousness, did that physical grizzly bear have a realization that things have changed? I'm not as free as I used to be. I've got some challenges going on in my world. She said the bear had to leave for the safety of others. What does that tell us? Maybe got too close to town. Maybe people are encroaching. Some road was put through. Some campground was put through. Maybe there was an interaction. And the freedom to live its life in a transcendent way was challenged. And so did that grizzly bear have anything in consciousness around that? I think it's interesting to contemplate that. Every day that goes by, science is showing us how intelligent the beings we share this world are. I mean, they have proven that ants have personalities. You know that there's ants who are lazy? You know there's ants who figure out how to get another ant to carry something for them? Do you know that if you look at a pile of ants long enough, you'll start to recognize them? Oh, that's Sam. You know, everyone's got to move the potato chips around, and he's going to go find something else to do because he doesn't really want to do that. He's going to talk someone into it, right? And so every day that goes by, we're realizing that there's a sense of consciousness. There's also a sense of, and this is the highest form. If you talk to anthropology, one of the highest forms of consciousness is what is called the grieving period, because it acknowledges a worth and a value of another being that moves beyond the physical realm. Have you ever seen the documentaries where the elephants are going across their land and they will stop at the bones of other elephants and stop and feel those bones? They're not feeling water buffalo bones. They're not feeling hyena bones. They're stopping with elephants, and they will gather around. And if you think of that, the anthropological psychology of that, they are stopping on their way to a water hole to spend time to honor. That's a higher level. And so imagine for a moment, coming back to the grizzly bear, who wanted to transcend this, who wanted to maybe be part of the solution of this, who had to come forward in some way, shape, or form to come together with a woman named Laura, who was willing to come together with him on a spiritual, mystical level to carry his words forward. When you heard her say, "We believe in conserving the land," is it possible that those are his ideas as well? Is she tapping in there to a universal wisdom? a universal idea. In terms of my, part of my title today where I put the grandmother's piece in there is because, again, as a metaphysician, I take a piece like this, I explore it, I start pulling other parts together to help me understand it. That's what we do in this teaching. We draw from a lot of ideas, a lot of sources, and we put it together in our lives to make it work. And over the last couple of years, I've been turned on to this idea of the Grandmother Speak series. I think there's 4 books in that, and I'd heard about it before, and I chose a book, and it was, when I first got into it, it was very different than what I normally read. It took some time to develop a taste for it, to get into the rhythm, and then I found it to be incredibly powerful for me, because what it does is it gives me the archetype. And so what's big in spirituality and big in our teaching are the archetypes, what Carl Jung talks about. The higher ideal. And so I think of a grandmother, and I know maybe in our physical worlds we've had grandmothers maybe we struggled with, or we didn't have grandmothers, or maybe they had their own issues, but I'm talking about the archetype, the higher ideal of archetype. So when we hear the term grandmother or grandma, what comes up for us? And for me, because of the feminine nature of it, what comes up for me is the idea of the source of gained wisdom. I had 2 grandmothers, and one of them was very close to that archetype. The other one was interesting. She was her own thing. But I had one grandmother who was very close to that, and this particular grandmother, my mom's mother, had been through a lot in her life, and I won't go into it, but just almost from birth all the way up, and having children herself, and whether it was financial issues, family issues, cultural issues, all kinds of things. She struggled a lot. But my grandmother was, I remember as a kid sitting on the front porch with her, peeling the leaves off of corn or breaking peas open, and she'd grab me and have me sit next to her. And I remember that no matter what I was going through, there was no judgment. There was just love. There was acceptance. There was, you're going to be okay. But she did offer up some tips once in a while, and every single time her tips were dead on because she'd received so much wisdom in her life. And so as Laura and now Grizz come together, are they tapping into those ancient energies that move beyond judgment? That will basically, as Fillmore says, we come into a place where the physical Laura is outside, the physical Grizzly is outside, and we come together into a place where we are dealing with these highest of ideals that come forward. We can forget for a moment that I am Andy with the challenge, that I am limited to this physical realm, to the heavy energy of what it is to be a living being. I can forget that for a moment, and I can be something else. He can forget that he's a bear. She can forget that she's a human, and they can come together and forge a wisdom. In 1972, I was about 15 years old, which is that's a type of age where you're anywhere from, you have these different stages in your life, but anywhere from 13 to the end of your teens becomes incredibly critical in terms of how you're trying to figure out the world. And there was during that time in 1972, I'd grown up and I think I share this with a lot of you, the Vietnam War was in the background, and it was touching families, and it was on the news every day, and it was kind of tearing the country apart in terms of who was for it and who was against it, and it very much it pushed families apart, it pushed cultures apart, it pushed society apart. And I was growing up around young people who were, was a peace symbol, and we were listening to rock and roll and the protest music, and we were plugged into what was going on over there, and we would call those atrocities and things like that. And meanwhile, there was another generation, which was my father's generation, who were World War II veterans who, we're Americans, we support the president, we fight for freedom, and they saw it completely different. And as a 15-year-old kid, I'm just in this world trying to figure it out and which way do I go. And when I would begin to go with my generation, there would become this distance between my father and I. And he and his generation of all those veterans that his friends were those guys. So there was in 1972, there was a photo that was printed, and it was called later on the Napalm Girl. And it was a Vietnamese girl running with her family up a road. And behind them, it's a black and white photo. You see all these clouds behind them, and you see the terror in their faces. And the thing about her was she had no clothes on, and she was obviously burned, and she was coming forward. And this photo won a Pulitzer Prize. And if you want to see it, you can put in Napalm Girl, and it'll come up. But I'm going to leave it at that because I don't want to get too dark today. And as a 15-year-old kid, I was like, oh my God, And this woman is now, she lives in the United States, she lives in Canada, and she's gone on to live her life. But at that time, and she didn't even know this for years, she became something that was really seminal. There was something that took place as a result of that photo. I was with my dad, and he was with a couple of his friends, people his age. Maybe they worked together. And my dad, I heard them talking, and I'm listening. I'm not in the conversation, but I was really listening to the conversation. And that the subject of that photo came up. And I heard my dad say this, and I could have fallen out of 10 chairs. He said, maybe this Vietnam thing wasn't such a good idea. Maybe there's some people who are right about this. I couldn't believe it. Wow. I logged that away in my head, and what's amazing was the United States was mostly pulled out by the end of 1973. 72, the photo comes out. By the end of 73, we're pretty much out of Vietnam. Now, is there a direct connection? That's an interesting question. Years later, I'm sitting in a college library doing a research on a term paper I'm supposed to do. And in the material I was looking at, that photo came up. And whoever the gentleman was who had written the material, a historian of some kind or whatever, had a commentary on that photo. And he said, is this the photo that allowed Americans to stop being Americans for a moment and to become people? And I thought about my dad. Stop becoming Americans for a moment and become a person. To be able to see that as a person. Could be my sister, could be my daughter, could be my niece, could be whatever. And it just, all those years later, I put this together. I go, oh my God. See, this is what Fillmore is trying to tell us. In terms of our own consciousness, if we take this idea and we bring it down into our lives, our prayer work, the work that we do for each other and for ourselves, can we begin to move beyond the limitation of our identities and our belief systems to be something else for a moment? For example, can I put down my political affiliation to simply become a citizen? Can I put down my nationality to become a human being? Can I move beyond my gender to simply be a sentient being? Can I look at a grizzly bear and allow me to see them not as a bear, but as a being? Can I do that? And I think that, like all of you, I see what's going on around me. I don't like the way it feels. I don't like I have family members who have all kinds of belief systems, but I want to love them. I want to pray for them. I want to be there for them. I want us to all be intact as we go forward. I want us to all grow and transcend and evolve and heal. I want us to heal. What's my part of that in prayer? My part of that in prayer is to become something else, to be able to drop what has held me back, what has become such a heavy force in my life that I can't think beyond that. Fillmore says that's when it opens up to possibility and potentiality. That's what he says. Greg Braden, when the work he's done around prayer, he talks about a challenge and a wisdom are two extremes of the same experience, the completion of the same cycle. Our prayer work is a completion of a cycle, to go from the challenge to the healing. And ultimately, what Fillmore is talking about is the healing is always about wisdom. That's what Grizz and Laura Grizzly Paws are bringing forward. They're bringing forward a wisdom through their ceremony, through their connection, through, she said, I inhabit his spirit, and he is inhabited by mine. In our teaching, when we talk about prayer, there's a lot of talk about communion and alignment. And isn't that, if we think about this, doesn't this make it obvious that it's the alignment to where the healing can't help but happen? Because the fact of the matter is, no matter who is somewhere in any political place or cultural place or world place, and we boil it all down, if we go just a little bit below the surface, aren't we all looking for the same thing? Meaning, purpose, love, connection. In the work that I work in my day job, in working with people who struggle with things, is that this idea of we do a lot of imagining, we do a lot of imaging around what is it that you want. And here's the metaphysics of it. If a person keeps saying, I don't want to be let's say an addict, for example, I don't want to be an addict, I don't want to be an addict, I don't want to be an addict, I don't want to be an addict. The only way we transcend that is if we can say, well, what do you want to be? If you can take that title out of your life for just a moment, that title, and whatever power, negative power that word has in your life, can you go for something that is transcendent? That's a highly spiritual, metaphysical idea. In other words, to pray from the standpoint of something being accomplished. You know, a lot of people in prayer work look at us, those of us who practice this, say, what are you talking about? To name and claim and to align with the healing before it shows up, right? Charles Fillmore talks about we are revealing an ancient wisdom that has always been, and he calls them eternal wisdoms that just haven't shown up yet. But they exist as an eternal wisdom. So my job in what I do is to try and help someone imagine what it looks like. Now, so this is a spiritual concept. Now, I'm somebody, in order to keep my certification, I have to do CEUs all the time. I don't know how many of you have the CEU thing you got to do. You know, whether it's social work, real estate, whatever. There's these CEUs are these these units we put together of continuing education. That's basically what they are. So I have to put together 40 units of continuing education every 2 years to keep my certificate. So totally secular world, completely psychology, pharmacology, all the ologies, completely secular. So I'm doing a CEU a while back, and it's talking about the best way to approach people with substance abuse issues. And the entire, 4 hours worth of this, which is a lot of reading, a lot of test taking, right? And the whole thing was the power of moving beyond the word of addiction because it limits the client. Oh my God. Psychology has caught up. And so now it's a softening to a disorder, a challenge, those kinds of things. Because the A word, the addiction word, is so negative that people have a hard time moving beyond it. And I don't know how many of you have been around that world, but then there's uglier terms that are used sometimes for people with addiction issues that are even darker. And so my job as a counselor is that when one of those ugly words pops up, we have a conversation why that's not a good idea. So let's move beyond that word, shall we? And let's talk about what it is to be someone who is whole, complete, and divine. And psychology, these PhDs in these big universities, they've finally caught up to that. That's amazing. That's really cool. So Charles Fillmore says that this aligning ourselves with a truth that eternally exists, but which has not yet come into the broader consciousness. The question for all of us is, we see how this woman does her thing. What is our way? And I want to leave you with this today to contemplate what is your way within your practice to shut the door on the physical expression in order to open up to a deeper truth. That's what is the basis of this teaching. As Jesus said, by your belief it is done unto you. All right. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it. All right.